Okay, perfect. Well, happy International Women's Day. My name is Somi Rajsekar, and I'm the founder of Buildupwomen series, and I'm really, really excited and thrilled to host Mita in honor of International Women's Day. She's an outspoken advocate for equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, continually pushes these barriers down, and also a co-host at Roundtable Talk. For those of you who haven't had access or haven't heard of Roundtable Talk, please go listen to it. It's such an amazing podcast, and I'm really glad that this platform existed. It's helped me on so many levels, and it's essentially a podcast that focuses on breaking down these challenges for women of color that we face in the workplace. It is also a space where co-hosts DC, Marshall, and Mita, they both vulnerably share their own experiences and share these practical tips on how women of color can help navigate potentially in the workspace that we're in. I am excited for the conversation, but before we kind of dig in, I do want to acknowledge that I am joining from Ottawa, which is the unceded territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe. And they acknowledge Canada's First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples, their histories, and of course, contributions in our country as well. So Mita, thank you so much for joining me today. And before we begin, I want to say huge congratulations on season 2 of Roundtable Talk. I am carving out intentional time for the first episode that just recently dropped to kind of go in and just listen to this conversation. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for connecting with me through LinkedIn, the power of LinkedIn. And we are part of now the LinkedIn Podcast Network. We're really excited. Dee and I are thrilled. And so episode 1 has dropped, and we'll be dropping episodes weekly for the next 10 weeks for season 2.
Amazing. I'm excited. I'm going to put that on my calendar to just dive right in each time. So I wanted to kind of ask you this to kickstart this rather, what is the one thing that you'd want people who are listening to take away from our conversation today? Embrace the uncomfortable.
There's a representative, and I don't remember his name, so I'm just going to say he's a representative of New Jersey in the legislation here. And he said this quote with me during the riots of January 6th that happened in the US that really stuck with me, which is that we are just ordinary people living in extraordinary times. And so I think we all can make an impact in whatever way you choose to, whether that's at home, whether that's in your community, whether that's in your workplace. So I just really want people to think about like one thing that you'll do differently starting tomorrow, and that can have a ripple effect.
I love that. That's such a good self-reflection piece, but also a piece that leads towards that action and that accountability as well. So thank you. So let's dig right in. I wanted to kind of address this topic, which now has become such a norm in terms of career pivots. I mean, where for myself in school, where I thought I was going to be or where I needed to be, certainly not where I ended up being. And that's to kind of say the least, but I was also not prepared for those career pivots. I felt like it was a lot of self-discovery and a lot of self-learning to, well, one, embrace those pivots and to not shy away from them. But there's also that fear of the what if it doesn't work out? What if this is the wrong thing for me and I'm just being selfish of myself to take that, very kind of hesitant step for some people as well. So can we talk a little bit about that and your thoughts on that?
Career pivots. Well, I think my first thought that comes to mind is if you're comfortable in your job, start looking for the career pivot. And I had a mentor say to me very early on in your career, if you're comfortable, it's time to get uncomfortable. And so just think about that. And that's the times I've career pivoted. I had a very large, long career in consumer product goods, working for big Fortune 50, 10 companies. And now I'm at a startup in fintech. And I always joke, I was at Unilever for many years, and I have a lot of family. I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, a lot of families still back in India. Unilever is a big brand in India. So when I told people I was leaving, they couldn't understand why I would leave Unilever. But then they thought I was going to work Cartier. So they felt very excited that they get discounts on fashion bracelets. And I'm like, no, it's Carta. Carta, we help manage equity. We're the ally to the founder. I think there's this piece when it comes to career pivots, isn't there, where we're so concerned about what other people will think. Oh, I'm leaving a very big brand name to what some people might consider as a no-name brand. And like Carta is very well known in the venture capital world, in the private equity space. And so you have to do what you feel like is right for your career. You're in the driver's seat. And so I knew I was going to get a whole nother level of skills, which I have in terms of my leadership profile, to say I can work in big Fortune 10, but I can also work in the startup and a Series G company and watch that scale and help it grow. And so just really think about like, what skills are you looking to add? I think that's important. I think the other thing I would say in terms of career pivots, I've always gone after somehow the jobs that were the least glamorous, the least sexiest, had not enough budget, were under the radar. And I took those jobs and I made it my own. I put lots of points on the board. And then when I left, there was always a line of people who were like, I want that job. And so think about that, like, because, I always tried to get on the big brands and no one wanted me. And so then I was like, all right, let me go after the other brands. Let me go after the other opportunities. And I just really want anyone listening to think about that, to just let go of these titles, job descriptions, this brand, this company, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. Why? Ask yourself why you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because you made me reflect on outside influences, and I come from an Indian family, so that's one of those key pieces. I think for myself, when I was doing the career pivots, it's like, what is it going to be said about this career pivot, or what is the lecture I'm going to receive on the other end about the why? I mean, you're in such a stable position. Why would you leave to explore other opportunities, right? And I think that's part of the upbringing, is that once you are comfortable, you're safe, you shouldn't make that change. You should embrace the fact that you have this long-term position. So I think, if anything, that's been embedded a lot in how those conversations happen. So for myself, I think that was one of the things that I had to overcome, to say that, you know what, I'm ready. I don't know where it's going to go, but to your point about that comfortable, I think for me was also the point about not being passionate about it anymore, or was never passionate about it, or I thought that I needed to be in this space because that was what was influenced in kind of that environment. And then, in university, and I was like, okay, so then what am I going to do with this degree? How am I going to use it? But I've also realized that a lot of that experiences, I recall that I barely learned anything in the space that where I wanted to be, which is in community impact. But that was something that never existed when I was in university. So it's so interesting too. And I come up from a very small town. So there's also that piece of not having representation as an Indian family or a woman of color. And part of my challenge was also when I did enter into that workspace, or even prior to entering into different workspaces, there was always that kind of microaggression, or those things, where are you from? Or, are you sure you want to take this role? Or those unconscious or conscious biases. And those kind of experiences, in my mind, I was like, yeah, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to speak up and I'm going to tell them exactly how I feel. But I was really afraid of what the cause and effect would be, of what would be those ramifications of me doing this, and having this be an opportunity. What is going to happen to me if I just get up and leave? Or is that the right move, right? So yeah, I mean, let's talk about that, because that's it's so uncomfortable, but it's like, you want to make this move. And how do you take on this fear and create that change in the space that you're in, right?
Well, you only have one life to live, right? And I think that's what any of us who've gone through grief. I lost my father suddenly 5 years ago, and nothing like that to change your life perspective. So I live my life that way now. And so that's all I can say is, like, what are you waiting for? And don't let somebody else dim your light, right? Dim your light being dimmed. And that's happened to me. That's like the most heartbreaking thing. that can happen. And so even when you say you might appear to be stable, if your light is dimmed and you're not living your purpose, and when you do that, you will see, even the people around you will see how much more happier you are and how much more fulfilled you are, because you're living whatever purpose and whatever mission you want to make impact on. I think it's really, when you talk about microaggressions, or I say everyday aggressions, that's why Dee and I started the Brown Table Talk podcast, because so many of us women of color have faced so many things that we don't talk about publicly. And I say, like, my story is your story, is our story. I know I'm a creative. I know I like to write, but these stories are not made up. They've happened to all of us. And it's difficult and that's why we want allies to show up, because how many times do I have to tell you how to pronounce my name? How many times do I have to tell you, I am not Shilpa, I am Mita. Don't mistake me for the other brown woman, please. Like, how many times do I have to say and do these things before someone else actually says, actually, don't call her Mita, it's Mita. Or don't rename her, which has happened to me in jobs where I'm nicknamed. No, it's not appropriate. So that's why we need more allies to step up. And in the moments that I can, and I have the mental energy and space, I will stand up for myself, but it becomes exhausting.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the how do you pronounce your name, or I really remember this one very public event that I was moderating, and we had gone through this this question. Well, one, I wasn't asked about how to pronounce my name. So that was another thing. I felt like that was my obligation to be like, do you know how to pronounce my name, or how to do it? I say, yeah, totally. It's this, right? No, it's not. Or but the hilarious thing is I felt guilty. I felt that it was my role to play. And I almost said, I'm sorry, I should have told you how to pronounce my name. But in actuality, it should have been in reverse.
They should have asked from the start.
They should have asked from the start. But I think it's that ongoing pressure too about, okay, so I'm in this space, I'm new in this space, I'm underrepresented. I don't have anyone backing me up. I don't have that ally. And I think that's part of the challenge, or that barrier too, is that when you're already feeling so underrepresented in a space,
absolutely,
finding or having allies that can advocate for you is also really hard. And then the other thing is that there are different variations of what allyship.
Absolutely. And I think what you're also hitting on is power dynamics. It's very easy for me to say these things, but let's say it's the CEO who constantly mispronounces my name. It's not very easy. It can be very easy if I'm very junior. It's very easy for me to say, now, tell her to pronounce your name correctly. That's difficult. It's easier said than done when you're in corporations and organizations and in environments like you're discussing, where there's power dynamics, where you've been given an opportunity, where you're there to make impact, and then you're being diminished and uncomfortable, feeling like you're not even, can't even be honored with your name and how your name should be pronounced. I also think it's disclaimer language for all of us. I'm always like, oh, it's okay, no worries. I'm like, no, it's not okay. It's not okay that you keep mispronouncing my name. It's not okay that you keep mistaking me for the other brown woman on the team. No, it's not okay. But it is, I think, for me, as I talk about on the podcast, Dee comes to the table as a Black woman. I come as a brown South Asian woman. There's a cultural piece of me who's always trying to be hospitable, trying to be welcoming, trying to be non-threatening. Everybody's an auntie or an uncle. Everybody, children are to be seen, not to be heard. Being raised to always defer to authority. And then all of a sudden I'm supposed to go question my CEO. So in my mind, there's all these calculations I'm always making as well when I'm in these situations of how I'm going, how it's going to be received. What I say, how it'll be received.
Yeah, received. And I guess, what are people going, and that's the other thing, it's that what is going to happen next? So I've done this, I've corrected people several times. And then there's a part of you, for myself anyways, there was a part of me that just gave up and was like, yeah, sure, that's how you pronounce it. I'm just so exhausted.
Yeah, because you also don't want to be perceived as being difficult,
right?
As being an agitator, all the labels that are put upon us. And so sometimes it's just easier to let it go.
Yeah.
To let it go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that I've reached, so with obviously with COVID happened in March 2020, it's now 2022, which is just so odd to say that we're still in this mess. And I kind of embrace that. So with COVID happening in Canada, the way it unraveled was that there wasn't enough focus on the disproportionate impact on women, and dissecting the bit further, women of different socioeconomic status, women of color, the LGBTQ2S plus community, there wasn't enough representation on how it was impacting women in the community. And that's why Build Up Women happened. And also because I have never seen representation whenever I was attending conferences that specifically was focused on inclusion, but there were not inclusive conversations. So it was just very interesting to see. And I felt like that was also part of my accountability, in the sense that I felt, you know what, enough is enough. I need to do this, and I need to do it in a way where I have control over the narrative. And I was just so pleased by the way that unraveled, because I was really afraid to figure out, well, how is this going to happen? Is this going to be a positive or a negative from the community? But I think that's so important. We're always talking about accountability from a perspective of the workplace. These are all, how are they making an impact in the EDI space? What is their accountability? You're saying one thing, but what are you actually doing? Yes. But I think equally there needs to be that self-accountability piece as well, in terms of what are you doing yourself to kind of push this dialogue forward, and also advocating for those who already have a voice but may not necessarily feel comfortable to kind of come out and say it as it is, or like it is, right? So what are your thoughts on the need for that self-accountability, but also while we're kind of pushing for that accountability within the workplace itself as well?
Well, I'm in a position now where I've worked for enough time. I don't feel like I have anything to lose anymore. I have everything to gain. And so I feel like I am in a position now of privilege where I should be sharing my story, and I should be advocating for others. And so I do that. It's very difficult when you're earlier in your career, right? It's easy for me to say now. And if I'm talking to my younger version of myself, the younger version of myself never would have stood up for myself. Never. Yeah. I let people take credit for my work. I let people walk all over me. I was bullied. I was harassed. I was the victim of gaslighting, I shouldn't say target of gaslighting, all of those things. And so I think for anyone who has endured any of this, and there's many of us now, unfortunately, to speak up, stand up, show up, and to make change, I think that's really important. And I think it's just, especially in this time, for those of us who've had the privilege to work from home, and a big thank you and a shout out to frontline workers. I've been in this corner of the bedroom for 2 years working now, and just to be aware of what's going on behind the screen and what's going on for people, because you can't see the grief and pain behind the Zoom call. And so to really get to know people and check in on people, because if you don't know what's going on for people, then how can you stand up for them, or how can you be an ally? And that's when I think performative allyship shows up, is when it's like the equivalent of diversity washing. Corporations making lots of statements on all the money they're going to spend, half of which has been spent, half of which isn't. Oh, it's Black History Month, let's celebrate, but we're actually not building an end-to-end inclusion ecosystem, but let's post something on Instagram. And that's performative allyship too, is like a check the box, right? And so if you don't get to know people really well and don't get to understand and think about how you can show up for them, then it falls flat. It falls flat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can definitely relate from that sense of that tokenism piece. Yes. It's happening, unfortunately, where the focuses only happen on the days of, or the months of, yes. Like, Black History Month, or with, Women's Week that's coming up in March. It's like the focuses, the topics all of a sudden rise only on those months. But you're absolutely right in the sense that these things need to happen on a continual basis.
365 days a year, right?
365 days per year. And then there needs to be that action piece as well. It's like, okay, so you're doing this action piece, but also evaluation piece, as in an organizational audit, in terms of yes, are we doing this within ourselves, and how are we also supporting the people who are working for us in this space, right? So and having that open dialogue. But I feel like there's that uncomfortableness in terms of it's a lot easier for people, for organizations to put the word out there, but more difficult, or that uneasiness of implementing or having those uneasy conversations within the organization themselves.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
agree with you. And I think part of it is we have been trained, at least I have been, to live in a world that doesn't shut up. You are supposed to be this type A leader who always have the answers. My God, has COVID shown us otherwise? But it's this idea that I'm supposed to always be problem solving. And guess what? If I come to you to share with you a racist experience I have because I trust you as a coworker, as a leader, your job is not to be an investigative journalist. Your job is not to dismiss it. Your job is not to create false equivalencies of, oh, this happened to me, this happened to me. Your job is not to be like, I don't think that person actually meant that. I don't think that actually happened to you. Your job is to believe me, and your job is to sit in the uncomfortableness of what I'm about to tell you because you've never experienced it. And that's what's uncomfortable, because you're trying to build empathy. And so that's why people avoid these conversations, because guess what? Racism hasn't been solved, and you're not going to solve it in a 30-minute conversation with me. But if I trust you, and you sit there and you watch me cry, or you sit in the uncomfortableness and you just say, like, what can I do for you? How can I show up for you? And I'll just say, well, just thanks for listening. And in a week, if you check up, or in 2 weeks, I mean, that's what it is. And I think it's actually like, I'm the one who experienced the racist incident, right? So imagine how painful it is for me.
Mm-hmm.
So allies, get over it. Like, you're gonna have to experience it. Like, I'm on a journey to be an ally for the Black community. I talk to my friend Dee about this almost every day. Like, being an ally, being an advocate, as I like to say, will cost you something. It costs you your pride, it costs you your comfort, it can cost you financial, emotional security. You're going to make mistakes, but that's the journey. That's the journey.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're absolutely right in the sense that it's also about learning and unlearning as you're going, right? It's just that piece of, well, admitting to the fact that, okay, so what you've done is not the right approach, or not right. So how are we going to rectify this, and how can we work in a collaborative fashion with allies, with genuine allies, I should say, because there's allies that just, do it as like a self-gratification thing whenever you see a post and you're like, I believe in this. I like this post.
Or like, I know what this person is like behind closed doors.
Yeah.
I know
exactly.
what this person really is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And then when it comes to actually doing something, and it's like,
right.
I can't, I'm not ready, or I just don't want to, or one of those things. So, and we talked about allyship on a variety of different levels. But when it comes to kind of the specific journey, kind of speaking for myself, I was laid off right when COVID hit. And so that's also, I'm embracing that. I embraced it. Before, I was fearful, and I was like, okay, you know what, Buildupwomen has to happen because of what's happening right now. And allyship played such a crucial role in the way that the series happened, with women that I had never met, providing that support and guidance and mentorship, and from a vast amount of different spaces across this country. And to me, I was just like, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced. And for the first time, I have to say. So, and I'm in my 30s. So that's like, I'm like, wow, this is how it needs to be, or should be. Yeah. And why isn't this happening more? Why aren't more people kind of willing to kind of commit to genuine allyship in that journey of inclusion? And how can this be powered in a way where it can happen? Because there is a need for more of that in the community space, but there's a lot of that hesitancy in terms of, well, one, am I going to be saying the right thing? What if I don't see the right? Because some of the things that you already addressed, it's like, how do I? But if I don't say the right thing, am I going to offend people? Like, how is that journey, I guess I should say. But I feel like for myself, it's been a space where not only I'm very grateful for one, that it's happened and it's still happening, but on the other sense is that I'm able to give back from kind of what I'm learning and also unlearning for for incredible women who are looking to do the same thing in their communities and to action things out in their communities. And I and I was kind of really thrilled or excited to ask you this one because I'm glad that a platform like Roundtable Talk exists, because I've never, that was part of my thing, is that I didn't have anything out there that I could relate to, that could really help me with my journey and to feel like I wasn't alone in my experiences and thoughts, because to your point, it's not spoken as much as it needs to be. And I feel like with Roundtable Talk, it's basically like a very blunt and uncomfortable and straightforward, you know, don't care what other people think conversation. So what was the why and the purpose and the vision, or I guess even more importantly, the mission behind Roundtable Talk, and why now in the launch of this amazing?
Well, yeah, I mean, the story is that I met Dee Marshall in 2017 at the Multicultural Women's Conference in New York City, and we really sparked there. I hired her to be a coach for me and also some of my team members. And the truth that she found out later was I was in a really horrible harassment, bullying, toxic situation at work. And I stayed in that role for far too long, and I endured a lot, and she helped me through it. And she helped me journal, she coached me, guided me, and I'm the client she can't get rid of because now we're close friends. But that really, the podcast was born out of that relationship. And the fact that as I started telling people more and more, I would say particularly women, why I had left this job, they all had a story to share. That's why I've left, or that's why I've moved on, or that's why I decided to start my own company. And so we just felt the need to share. I mean, we self-funded the first season. We were just sort of like, God, let me get my mom to download it. I hope somebody listens to this. But it was like, because it's a friendship and because she's a coach and I have stories and we talk about honest, real things that have happened. And then, like I say, how do I want people to show up for me? How do I want to show up for people? If I could go back to those experiences, what do I wish someone would have done differently? And that's why the allyship piece is so important. But that's the truth. It's been really healing for me, if I'm to be honest. And I hope it's helping to heal other people as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like when I was listening to the podcast, it felt like I wasn't alone on so many levels, that it was more like you're not wrong to feel this way. I think oftentimes that's something that I've struggled with earlier in my career is, am I the problem for feeling this way, for feeling that I said something that I shouldn't have, even though I knew that was the right thing to say, when it came to addressing some aggressions and racism that was faced. But I felt like this podcast really helped in that space and saying, you know what, no, you're right for feeling the way that you're feeling. And here are kind of the steps that you could kind of take as well. And I think that's really important, because if we're living in such a go space, that we don't take enough time for ourselves to just reflect on that exact thing that you're talking about. You know, am I happy with where I am? And am I happy with where I'm going? And, you know, 5 years down the road, am I going to look back on this and say, gosh, I really wish I made the decision to leave?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. But I want to say, you know, thank you to you and Dee for creating this really raw, I want to use that term, raw platform to not sugarcoat anything and to just say things as it is. And I think that's really important in this day and age. And
I appreciate that. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, is like, I wish people would have believed me when I told them these stories.
Yeah.
The dismissal, or I'm being too sensitive, or that's not that important, or I need to get over it. Why? No. And so there's power when we can share our stories and share them in the masses. So, and I'll tell you, I've had a lot of allies reach out to me, white men who I used to work with, who I'm still friends with, who were just like, wow, we feel like we're hearing stories that we would never normally hear. Right. So for, I think, women of color, I had someone reach out to me and say, it's like you're reading my journal. Like, right.
Wow.
Well, I think for many, like you're saying, Dee and I find for many women of color, there's community. That's my story. That's her story. That's our story. And for many of the allies, they're like, I've never heard this story before. No
Mhm.
one's given me a seat at this table. Like I've never heard this. So that there's power in that too, because now that you've heard that story, you can think about how you might act differently if that happens in your presence again.
Yeah, and I think that's so important too. It's not just to do in the sense of, self-reflection, but also it's very important to know that you're not alone in
Yes.
these experiences, and your experiences are your own, and it is what you felt at that time when it happened, and you have every right to do so. I think even now there's obviously a lot more work that needs to be done, um, continuous work
Yeah.
in that space of building that confidence within ourselves. I'll speak for myself, and for me, I wish I had that confidence, in my 20s. Even in school when I was the only brown kid in school, and
Yes.
everyone was asking me, where are you from? You can speak English really well. Yeah, thanks. All those things, right? So, but this has been an absolute pleasure, and
Well, thank you
I'm
so much for having me.
yeah,
I really appreciate it. And thank you for the impact you're making in the world. Thank you
thank
for
you.
that.
And thank you. I feel like there's a new tribe now as well. My tribe is extending. So this has been a phenomenal conversation. And I really hope that people take this and embrace it and do some self-reflection and also be an ally to others as well. So happy International Women's Day to you. So I thank you for this
Thank you so
amazing
much.
conversation.
And I wanted to close by just reminding everyone to be an ally with their wallet and to support women-owned businesses. And I'm wearing jewelry from Blossom Box Jewelry. Reka is the founder and CEO of Blossom Box Jewelry, and their South Asian inspired pieces, which are favorites of Mindy Kaling and Oprah and Mina Harris. So please also don't forget to support with your wallet and be an
Yeah,
ally in the way as
absolutely.
well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mita.